Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the Safe Travels podcast. My name is Joey. I'm just off the coast here in Northern California at Redwood National and State Parks, and this morning I sat down with Redwood National Park Superintendent Steve Mietz to talk all about the beautiful restoration story that's happening with these redwood trees. Steve, it's an honor to be here and it's an honor to talk with you. You are the superintendent here at Redwood National Park, and before we jump into this incredible place and the restoration efforts that are going on here, I want to talk about you and your journey to this park. So what got you into nature and getting into the National Park Service?
Yeah, so I got into nature as a kid. I was a Boy Scout, eventually an Eagle Scout. So, I spent a lot of time in the outdoors on the East Coast in New Jersey, and which is always felt like I was born in the wrong spot. And when I was a teenager, I went out to Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico and hiked in the mountains and got to see a place that wasn't a giant urban and suburban area between New York and Philadelphia, and said, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. And so I went to undergrad back east, but then as soon as I got a chance, I kind of reached escape velocity from the New York City metro area and came out to the University of Montana in Missoula to do my graduate work. And the story has been written since then. I've been to Montana and South Dakota, Arizona, Nevada, and now California. So I'm touring the West by different jobs. It's quite lovely.
This is a very unfair question because it's hard to pick favorites, especially when everything, especially out west, is absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
But is there a favorite landscape you like surrounding yourself with out at these parks?
Yeah, so there's so many different, it is kind of an unfair question because each different landscape has its own unique traits. And so I do love the high desert landscape, living in the mountains at elevation, but in a desert is truly magical because you come out of a desert and you move up through the ecosystems, like at a place like Great Basin where you're starting at 5,000 feet in the valley and moving all the way up to 13,000 feet. So you get to see almost all of North America within a few miles. And so living in that environment is really magical. It's sunny, it's dry, but then you also get tons and tons of snow at a place like Great Basin. But then on the flip side, you live in a place like this is like living in the forest planet of Endor, which of course they filmed here, right? So you can feel the life here. You can feel how everything here, it's just, you can look around and everything is just alive, and there's just layers upon layers of life everywhere because it's a perfect climate. It's tempered, it's rainy, it's sunny, it's just absolutely wonderful here. So you just feel like you're full of life when you're here at Redwood National Park.
Absolutely, and I think one of my favorite things about the arid desert climates you're talking about is you learn so much about all the adaptations that plants and wildlife go through. But we're going to talk a lot about that in the case of the redwood and how adaptive the redwood has been over time and how really resilient it is. What makes redwood really unique to me, especially the national park and the state parks here, is when you go to national and state parks, they typically say this park was established for preservation. Well, this park here is really focused on restoration. What exactly is being restored here, and why was there a need for restoration here?
Yeah, so it's all about the history of the redwoods. So for a long time, many folks recognized that this was a special forest and that we needed to protect it. And so over decades, groups like Save the Redwoods League and the Sierra Club were working and fighting and sometimes buying land and then donating it to state parks, which is some of our old growth parts of this park are in state parks within Redwood National and State Parks that is from the 20s that they preserved some of the most majestic groves of old growth redwoods and put those aside. But then over the convening decades, people were trying to establish a national park, and because redwoods are such a merchantable lumber, they're naturally rot resistant. They're absolutely gorgeous color of this reddish brown color that many folks are aware of. And so redwoods are just really an amazing tree for both their resiliency, but also just their marketability. And so there was great resistance. There was a lot of money in these trees. And so the after post-World War II industrialization, and with mechanization coming in, that's where the redwood forest started to really get cut down. And there was a lot of interest in really stepping up some type of preservation, preserve what little bit is left. And as many folks won't know, that 95% of the forest has been cut down of the old growth redwood forest. So there's only 5% of old growth redwood left that has not been cut down. And of that 5% that's left, about half of that is right here within Redwood National and State Park. So we have preserved what little bit is left of this forest, and then that's about a third of the park, and then 2/3 of the park are either prairies or shorelines, but most of it is the second growth forest, which we can talk about our works to restore that. And that's where our restoration comes in. We have about 70,000 acres here of second growth forest that really is unhealthy. It's not doing well, and the streams are clogged with sediment. The trees are too close together, and we have to take action to help this forest heal itself.
You led me perfectly into my next question. Was you led me to this spot for a very specific reason. So what is the spot that we're at, and why did we come here?
Right, so this spot is called Whiskey 40, which is one of our research plots that was put in place by some staff that we still have here who did their graduate work here in Redwood National Park. And what they were studying is they recognized back 20, 30 years ago that these forests were too densely, they were fire prone, there's all the trees are too close together, they're competing too much, the water and nutrients, because of the way that when they clear cut this whole area, this area was clear cut, you wouldn't believe it right now. When they clear cut this area in the 50s and 60s, they then aerially reseeded it from helicopters, mostly with Douglas fir that wasn't even from this area, from Oregon actually. And so they came in because they were trying to establish an industrial forest, and Douglas fir for dimensional lumber has a lot, is merchantable, it grows faster than redwoods. And so that's what it was being set up as forest lands. Redwood was the most expensive park ever. It was bought from all these timberlands but when they bought it, then they gave it to the park, and the Park Service goes, well, we preserve stuff, so we don't touch it, right? That works if it's an old growth forest, just let the natural process happen. It doesn't quite work when it was an industrial forest with a bunch of roads that are prone to landslides, a bunch of creeks that are clogged with sediment, and a bunch of trees that were aerially reseeded with the wrong species too close together. And so fast forward 40, 50 years later, these folks recognize that this plot, we need to go in and start thinning these forests to help release those trees, turn it back into a redwood forest, and those redwoods that are left, give them more space to grow, give them more light and nutrients. And so that's what we're representing here. Behind us here, we have a very typical representation, we can show you later on camera, what a second growth, very sick and unhealthy forest looks like. There's very little understory. There's very little habitat for all the critters that live here, and doesn't provide a lot of habitat to kind of connect this. As we sit here between some old growth patches that are on both sides of us here, there's not a lot of connectivity for the wildlife if we don't go in. What we represent here is about a 40% thinning here, and 20 years later, you can see what happens. We get multiple stages of the forest coming up. You get all this understory, and the trees that are left, which we do come in and measure these are research plots, we can measure that these trees that are left are growing much faster and are much healthier. And again, this would be much more resilient to fire as well, because that being a fire-prone area, being all thin and sickly trees, these are healthier trees and they're more spaced out. So everything here is both a healthier forest, but also more protected against a catastrophic wildfire that could come through here.
And even on the cameras right now, we'll show the footage behind us, but right directly behind us is, you can see some light shedding through, and in front of us, there's really no light. It's extremely dark.
It's dark.
And how about the difference in biodiversity between the two, especially the plant floor?
Right, yeah, so all these different parts of the canopy that are now growing up. You have the stuff on the forest floor, you're getting a second dimension with some of these middle-aged trees, and then you have the larger trees. You're getting a lot more habitat complexity into this ecosystem. And so the difference between a second growth sick forest is way too dense and over thin, it's almost like an ecological desert compared to something like this, where we just went in and thin it, and then we just walk away and let nature take its course. And that's really all we're trying to do here, is we're just trying to help this forest that was given a really bad start, right? Like had a bad childhood, and now we're like kind of giving it a boost, you know, and we're just helping it on its path towards what we say, towards old growth characteristics. We're just trying to accelerate the path to get these forests. They would eventually gotten there in thousands of years. We're trying to accelerate that up into 50, 100, 150 years to get these forests that are really in second growth and would take thousands of years to get to being the beautiful old growth forest that people come here to see. We'll get those characteristics, all those habitat benefits, all the species that depend on old growth forest will start using these habitats much sooner because of this restoration work we're doing.
And how will thinning down and moving those second growth forests into the old growth characteristics, as you just mentioned, help the redwood trees? And is this just benefiting Douglas firs, or is this obviously focused heavily on the redwoods as well? Yeah,
so the forest, part of what we do in the forest prescriptions that we do is when we go in and we do a thinning, each stand will have a different prescription, and sometimes we remove the biomass. So just getting the biomass off the landscape opens it up so stuff can grow up, right? Because a lot of times there's just a lot of fuels and stuff on the floor. It doesn't allow species to grow up. But when we go in, we definitely are trying to turn it back into a redwood forest. So we're taking out a lot of the Douglas fir, we're taking out some of the other species that are there, and really selecting for those redwood trees so that we're giving them more space to grow and spread out and grow faster and bigger. And one of the benefits that we're starting to see, and we have more studies that we're doing right now, is acre for acre, this is the best carbon sequestration spot on the planet, better than the Amazon, right? This is it. So every dollar we invest in thinning this forest and restoring this landscape makes those redwoods grow faster. And the redwoods are putting on carbon right now, and they're going to hold it for thousands of years because, again, it's rot resistant and they live for hundreds and thousands of years. And so as you're storing that carbon, you're storing it for thousands of years. So it's a great, great carbon sink. It's one piece of the puzzle. It's not going to solve the climate crisis, but if we're looking for a nature-based solution to store carbon, this is the place to do the investment in. And that's a big part of what we're just starting to explore and try to do more of, because what we're learning and what the scientists are showing us is as these trees get bigger, they put on more carbon. Like these big giants that you see, those, they grow just a little bit. They're so massive, they just continue to put on more carbon than these little tiny thin trees that are competing with each other.
That's so fascinating. Yeah. I think our mind might go to, well, if you're moving Douglas firs, you must be planting redwoods, but that's not necessarily the case. Why isn't that?
Well, because here's the amazing thing about redwoods. They're so resilient that a lot of the redwoods, you would think, oh, we've lost the ecological DNA integrity of these forests. But in fact, actually, you can look right back here. These were redwoods that were cut down, and these grow out of the stumps. They are very resilient. So I'm not saying every stump survives, but a lot of stumps survive, and that those trees just regrow out of those stumps into what looks like a fairy ring around the base of the stump. And so a lot of times we'll go in and we might thin out a few of those stems coming out of there to help the remaining ones grow even faster. So those redwood forests are here already. All we need to do is help them get a little more space so they can grow and be stronger.
You just mentioned fairy ring, sometimes referred to as a family circle, which I find extremely fascinating about the redwoods. Can you talk about what is a fairy ring and or a family circle? Yeah,
so when they came through and they cut down these old growth giants, right, those trees are not dead, and they were strong enough then to resprout out and build new stems out of their stumps. And so what happens is that because they were round trees and they're rather big, it builds a ring of stems that grow out of it. And so when you can stand in the middle of one of those old stumps that they all rode away, and you'll just look up and you'll just see a ring of trees. It's really neat.
That is really neat. So the second growth forests that are being thinned and trying to get back to the old growth characteristics, will they ever become old growth, or is that way down the line, or are they just going to inhabit characteristics of what they used to be?
Yeah, so the way we look at it is, with that 5% that's left, that's old growth. That we call old growth anything that hasn't been cut. So I think this second growth will become a new thing that we will say this is like, a restored forest or something like that. I don't know if we'll ever call it old growth. That will be a decision for future people to decide as it takes on those characteristics and they become 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 15 feet wide. Is that an old growth tree? Yeah, probably. Is it second growth? Yes. And so at what point do we say it becomes old growth? Yeah, maybe 50, 100, 150 years from now, it might be in those characteristics, enough of them to say this has enough characteristics that we're going to now say, even though it's been harvested, this is now what we consider old growth. And of course, now that we're in a national park, it will be preserved forever.
What is the size difference between the redwoods that you see in a second growth forest versus the old growth forest?
Yeah, so like the redwoods in a second growth forest can be like maybe a foot or two. DBH is diameter breast height is how they measure trees, right? And so like, for example, these ones right behind us are very typical of maybe that's like a foot DBH, right? And so what we say here in the park is somewhere between 2 and 4 foot DBH trees start to show the branching and the multi-branching of an old growth tree that it has enough characteristics to support some of the endangered species that rely on old growths. And so that's those type of trees. We work really hard. Anything within the park that's more than 4 foot diameter breast height, we try to say we're going to try to protect that tree as much as we can from whatever activity is going on, because that's showing characteristics of being an old growth, which is why we're here. We're here to protect those trees.
What is the size of some of the biggest trees here in the old growth forest?
Oh yeah, so we have some of the biggest trees in the world. Sequoia, of course, has the biggest trees, right? But we have some big monsters here too that are, 10, 15 foot DBH all over the place. But it's really not, we say here is, but of course we have the tallest tree actually just a few miles from where we're sitting right here is the tallest tree in the world. And, that while they grow tall, they also get rather large. And so they say that the probably the biggest tree in the world was cut down somewhere in this area because they're so tall, they actually have a slightly more mass than, say, the General Sherman tree at Sequoia. And so, but within the park, we have some of the largest and both tallest and largest trees in the world.
And you just mentioned how big they are, but what's fascinating is their roots don't go crazy deep underground.
No, they don't.
And so are there, with the trees being so close together in a second growth forest as compared to an old growth forest, if you go off trail or when you're walking around, are you stepping all over these intricate root systems if they're spread across as opposed to deep?
Yeah, I mean, we had some concerns where there was some social trailing in a place that we call the Grove of Titans, where we did put in an elevated walkway. If you're up north in the Jed Smith Redwood State Park, a few years ago, we worked with our partners to build an elevated walkway, which is just wonderful, that takes you through this grove. There was so much social trailing that we were concerned about damage to the redwood trees and just also damage to this landscape of undergrowth as well, which is important ecologically. And so keeping people on trail is important just to try to kind of minimize the impact upon the larger forest. Because again, there's just such small amount of this old growth forest left, and it really does get loved to death because there's only 5% left. And so trying to contain that is important. But the really interesting thing about the roots, though, is that the old growth redwoods, because they are kind of shallow, they'll grow their roots together and they'll knit together, and it's much less about the trees than it is about the community. The forest itself is what it's all about, and how they stand up and support each other, right? And with their trees, in a big windstorm, if one tree is stronger, it will hold up the other one with their roots. And there's even some studies that show that they send nutrients and information between those root systems. And so the more we learn about this forest, the more fascinating it is. It isn't really about the tallest tree in the world, which is why it got preserved, but much more about this amazing, amazing redwood forest, which is just so unique in the world.
When you learn about the redwood, it really makes you feel like when you go on a hike here that you're in a forest that's alive, that these trees are alive with you, which is really a special feeling. I don't know if I felt it anywhere else before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what it really is, something that's special of this area, that you do feel like there's just so much life here that it just really penetrates you. You really get the sense of why, when you think about what a life force would be that binds the whole world together, when you're standing in a redwood forest, you get to feel the real sense. It's the quiet. We talked about that earlier. You can really feel the quiet here. You can really feel the peacefulness, but you also feel like the life and the hope and resilience of a forest like this.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about really just one layer and aspect of the restoration efforts that are going on here with the second growth forest and the thinning of that. What about the watersheds here and some of the old lumber roads that have existed in this park? What are the efforts going towards those two?
Yeah, and so there's three rungs to Redwood Rising, which is our large-scale restoration project. One is this thinning project we've talked about quite a bit, to release the trees and get them stronger. The other two pieces are, there's a whole bunch of skid trails and old logging roads that are completely inaccessible. They're all washed out, and a lot of them, they cause landslides because there's just a lot, it rains here quite a bit. And so any exposed soil is just going to slough down. And so a lot of those roads have just melted into the creeks. And so we have creeks that are buried under 10 or 15 feet of soil as well. And so what the two other elements of this is to remove the roads, as well as to dig out the creeks and get all that sediment, and then we're literally rebuilding the mountain. So as we're going through, we're not just like closing a road with like a Kelly hump and saying, okay, that road is closed and now it's wilderness. No, we go in and we recontour the mountain and rebuild it, and we scoop out the creek and re-daylight it. We've daylighted miles of creek through the Redwood Rising project, and we take that soil and then we put it back on top. So we're like taking the soil that fell down in all this rainfall and through all this erosion and putting it back up. And so we're restoring the creek, aquatic restoration, as well as removing the roads at the same time, and really rebuilding mountains and rebuilding the whole landscape. And it's a big project. It's very expensive. This is not stuff that's done with shovels. This is done with backhoes and bulldozers and big pieces of equipment. And so this is not minor restoration. This is watershed landscape level restoration that we're doing. And that is it's really exciting. One of the findings that happened a few years ago was that one of the creeks we dug out, within just a few months, we saw young yearfish, little fries, coming back up and using stream that had been buried for over 50 years under sediment. And the fish were like right back in there. So it's like this ecosystem is just begging to be restored. And so it's so rewarding that we don't have to wait decades to see the results. We're seeing the results right away in terms of the benefits that we're getting from this restoration project.
And that was where I was going to go next, is some of the benefits that you've seen of this restoration project. What is fast forward 5 years down the road as you keep doing this project. You just mentioned some of the early rewards. What is the hope maybe 5 years from now of what we're going to be looking at here in this park?
Yeah, so 5 years from now, hopefully we'll have a whole bunch more acreage done. And so a lot of times when you first go to one of the restoration sites, you'll think a bomb went off, right? So it's somewhat, when we take people on tours of sites, this is a research site, so this is 20 years ago, this is what you'll see. But when you first go see it, it looks as if we've done a lot of damage to the landscape, right? Because we take something that had second growth forest on it and we pull back those trees and we're digging out creeks and we're recontouring roads that were buried. And so it looks as if it's really quite damaged. But then within a year or two, all that vegetation grows up and you can't even see any of the work, and it immediately turns green and it revegetates. So 5 years from now, you're going to see another 5,000 to 10,000 acres turn from this sickly, gross streams that are buried, sick, dead forest into this alive, amazing young forest that's just releasing its energy and growing towards the sky.
As superintendent of this park, what does that mean to you when you see that?
It means everything, right? Because this is what this park really, the Congress in 1978, when they expanded the park, told us they recognized that this park was 2/3 of it, 70,000 acres, was really damaged and needed to be fixed. And so they gave us special authority to say, please go and fix this park. And for many, many decades, through congressional appropriations, they funded restoration work, and they did great work actually in this watershed, in the Redwood Creek watershed. They did great work moving hundreds of miles of road, planting trees back then, because they didn't know that they didn't even need to bother planting because the trees just regrow on their own. And so they did a lot of that great work. And then around 2000, all that funding kind of dried up. And then they did this type of research that we're sitting in now, the Whiskey 40, to try to look at other things they could do. And that's where we reborn with this idea of this public-private partnership of Redwood Rising, where we partnered with the national park, partnered with the state parks, and Save the Redwoods League. So we have a public-private partnership. They can go out and raise private philanthropy. We can go out and get grants, and we can actually restore this. And so that's part of what makes Redwood Rising magical, is that we take the benefit of whether you're a state park or a national park or a nonprofit, and we can figure out who can more efficiently get this work done. And so a lot of times we'll be doing that. And the other key partner in this is the Yurok tribe. It's just helped us quite a bit. And they are just really experts at aquatic restoration. They're experts at this. And it's really, we're sitting in their ancestral territory right now. So having them engaged in this public-private partnership, doing the work within their own ancestral territory, it's meaningful to the staff there, but it's also meaningful to us because they are just doing really, really great work. And it's strengthening our relationship. So while we're healing this whole landscape ecologically, we're also healing relationships between the government, which has just treated Native Americans pretty poorly for centuries. Now we're healing that relationship between the federal government and Native American tribes.
I'm thankful you went there, because that's what I wanted to ask about next, was the importance of consulting with the local tribes, because they've existed here forever, since time immemorial, and they're the best stewards of this land and the best land managers for this land, right? So a part of that has existed here because of them forever is prescribed burns. So how have prescribed burns helped to get these forests back to healthy areas?
Yeah, so we're sitting up here in what we call the Bald Hills area of the park. And the reason it's called Bald Hills is because there's all these large prairies that were maintained. And they were maintained by the Yurok people and by other Native Americans. But in this particular area, the Yurok people would purposely go out and maintain these prairies for a variety of reasons. One, for ceremonial use, like we were talking about earlier, but also because it's creating a grassland habitat that brings, then they would get additional elk, and that would provide hunting opportunities and other reasons. So they purposely would maintain those prairies. And now we've continued that tradition, and the Yurok will come out and help burn with us here in these prairies up here in the Bald Hills to help maintain the prairies, because if you don't, the Doug fir, those darn Doug fir, they grow in very fast. They're very good at encroaching on these grasslands. And so if we didn't do anything, again, if we don't actively maintain this landscape like the Yurok people did, we will lose this ecological component, these prairies that have been around for centuries, right? And we want to maintain that historic landscape of the prairies as well as the forest here at Redwoods.
I do want to talk a little bit about ecology and the restoration part of it, because one thing that I absolutely love about this area is not only is this one of the only areas in the world where the coastal redwood can grow because of the climate here and the fog that rolls in from the Pacific. This area gives so much life to the redwood tree, but also without the redwood tree, there wouldn't be as much life here. The redwood tree provides so much benefit for animals that live their entire lives up in the redwood trees. Is there a discrepancy between the ecology of animals living in the redwoods and using the redwoods in the old growth forest versus the second growth forest?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, the biodiversity that we get and that within the old growth forest versus the second growth is night and day. It's the second growth forests are ecological deserts. The animals and critters just choose not to use that for the most part, and they will spend all their time either in these open prairies like we talked about or in the old growth forest. We also have several species that are dependent just on old growth. They evolved to deal with the old growth forest, and they're not well adapted to deal with the second growth and these younger trees. And so they need that complexity. So for all those reasons, we're saving a whole bunch of species that are special to the redwood forest by doing all the restoration work and preserving these old growth forests. Those species would just be gone.
And a part of the restoration efforts and ecology is recently, I think in 2022, the introduction of the California Condor coming back to this area. How special is that to work with the tribes and to get this kind of across the finish line of bringing condors back to this area? Yeah,
it's huge. Of course, the story of the condors is really the poster child for me of story of a highly endangered species that really is through our efforts, we can bring it back down to 22 trees in the early 80s, and that they decided to pull them into zoos and then actively breed them because they were going to lose them all for a variety of reasons because of DDT and lead poisoning from lead shot from hunters. And so all over the decades, they've been breeding trees. They've started release sites. When I worked at Grand Canyon, we had condors there from a breeding site down in Vermilion Cliffs. And so I was more than happy to hear that the Redwoods was working with the Yurok tribe to bring condors back here to the North Coast. And so to have redwoods, the largest bird in North America, flying above the tallest trees in the world was really a dream that it's just, it's too magical to believe. And for the Yurok people, the condors have a special religious meaning as well. And so for them, the elders of the Yurok came to the park and asked us to restore the condors. Would we work with them to restore the condors within their ancestral territories? And we said yes. And so working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, they developed that process. But it was I, as superintendent, consciously stepped back and let the Yurok tribe take the lead. And they are wildlife experts. You know, they can do this work, but in addition to that, they could bring the elements that they wanted to culturally to this project as well. And so, again, as we're restoring an apex scavenger, we're also restoring the cultural heritage of the Yurok people, and we can help with that. But we just step back as the Park Service to say, this is your project to lead. We're here to support you. And so that's what we've done. And we've been just immensely successful. We get 5 or 6 birds every year, different cohorts, and we release them. We're up to 18 free-flying birds, the largest birds in North America flying above the tallest trees in the world. And it's just magical at this point. So yeah, by this time next year, we'll have more condors flying here at Redwoods than existed on the planet back in the 80s.
Wow. Have you had the opportunity to see one flying here?
Yeah. So yeah, I've been there. I've had the luck when they do need to bring the condors in and do health checks because of lead poisoning is a big issue. So lead is banned in California, but there's a lot of people who have lead shot left over in their inventories. And so people will come in and the condors will, they'll shoot like an elk, let's say, and then they'll leave a pile, and that lead explodes inside it and creates problems. And so they'll leave that gut pile there, and the condors, as a scavenger, will come and eat that and then get lead poisoning from that. And it's actually a high source of mortality. And so they go in and they check the birds, every year for lead, and actually found one and actually had to treat it and then just released it a few weeks ago. And so it's a good process. But in one of those processes, I was actually able to hold the birds while they were doing some of their testing. So that was really magical. They are very, very large, very large. And it was, you had to hold them very strong. You have to hold them, so they feel secure. But it's to hold a bird of this size in your arm it was really a magical moment. They are really a special species that I really feel honored to be part of bringing them back to the world.
That's really special.
Yeah.
The Tolowa tribe, the Tolowa Deni, when I met with them, they talked about, in addition to the condor being back and how that is a spiritual signature for them, so is the redwood tree. Yeah. And so the work that the national park and the state parks, in conjunction with the tribes, have done, have brought back, I don't want to say spiritual peace, but a big piece of their culture back, as they refer to this tree as the guardian tree. So for you to see this forest thriving in areas that you've done work at, how important is it for you to see the cultural significance that the parks are bringing back to people who have existed here forever?
Yeah, no, and it's a great question because that's really a big part of, and we had just had one of our artists in residence who just left the park commented, and she was just here for a month, and she captured exactly what I always feel of is that we're restoring this landscape, we're healing it, right? We're taking efforts to do that, but we're also healing this relationship of the people that have been here the whole time. We're healing their relationship back to the land, and we're healing the relationship between the people here. Because as we do more and more work together, it's harder to see an enemy when you're working with them side by side, day in, day out. And that's the way we work here at Redwoods. We're working with the tribes day in and day out. We're not enemies, we're actually collaborators. We're brothers and sisters now, right? So we're healing that relationship between the people. We're creating the peace. The forest itself, by healing the forest, we're healing all these broken relationships that people have had with the Native Americans here. And so for them to get to work within their ancestral territory, and then to get to use their hands and their feet and their hearts to do this work, is so meaningful to me because they just do such exceptional work because it's their life's goal to do this work. And when I hear stuff like you're just saying about them feeling like it's renewing their heritage, that's really that's a big part of what we're trying to do here as well.
And a big part of their heritage is also rivers like the Smith River and
yes.
pristine watersheds that
yes.
are in this area. Can you talk about those watersheds and what make them so special,
right.
particularly to the state of California?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so the Smith River, one of our gem wild and scenic rivers, one of the most spectacular rivers, largest undammed river in California, and just absolutely pristine, golden turquoise water. And you get to float down. If you ever get a chance, all your viewers get a chance to, if you ever get on the water of the Smith River and you get to sit and float and just float on your back and look up at 300 plus foot trees as you're floating down in crystal clear water, it is a magical experience that you can't have anywhere else. And that river is truly special to the Tallawahd people, and we've started a new tradition, not just for the Tallawahd, all the Tallawahd people, all the Tallawahd tribes are now have a ceremony where they share food. You know, like many cultures, food is how they gather. And so over 2 years ago now, we invited them to come back in and share the ceremony right on this within Jed Smith State Park, right along the Smith River. And there they prepared a traditional meal and invited the entire public to come in and learn more about the Tallawahd people and their traditions. And they all got fed, right? And they were building canoes out of the old growth redwood that you know, sometimes they'll fall on a road, and we have extra wood that we can provide them. And so they provided demonstrations of that and bringing that, and we had that ceremony again. And that's a ceremony that we now plan to have every year. But again, it's part of that connecting the community. We invited the entire community of Crescent City, all of Del Norte County, to come and visit. And that was the tribe's idea. They don't want to be strangers. They want folks to understand that they've been here the whole time. They have traditions. It's not scary. This is actually a great thing, right? That they're here, and that it's so welcoming to be welcomed in over food and traditional food prepared in a traditional way by your neighbor, right, who happens to be a Tallawahd person. And that's such a magical ceremony that got brought back, and it's been such a wild success. So now we have ceremony brought back down here in the south. We talked about the dances earlier, and then up north we have that great ceremony along the Smith River.
And the reason I talk about especially the tribes that have existed here so much is because you just alluded to all of it. They're a part of the restoration process here, right? I think they're like a fourth layer of the restoration process of like reintroducing them back into the land that they've known forever. And I think one thing with the Tallawahd people that you just mentioned, they have a fish hatchery, and they're restoring all the fish that used to exist in these rivers back to the normal levels, which is so cool. And another layer of restoration in this area.
That's right. Yeah. So, and that's a big part of, so up there in the Smith, which is a pristine, undammed river, that's wonderful. But then again, all the work we're doing in all these watersheds, including up north in the Tallawahd area in Mill Creek watershed, as we're restoring these creeks, we're really fixing the upland stream areas, providing that habitat for all the fish that then feed into the Smith River. So the Smith River being the large river, all those fish go up into the tributaries to spawn, and they need that additional habitat. So as we build out this habitat, as we redig out these streams and we daylight them again after they've been buried for decades, we're creating so much additional habitat for all these native fish which are both endangered, but also have cultural significance for the Yurok and Tolowa people. And so it's just so wonderful. So as we're restoring an endangered species, we're also restoring their way of life so that they can actually practice their traditional practices.
Just sitting here talking with you, and you and I got to go on a nice drive together and see this beautiful park. I can tell in the passion in your voice and how you answer questions how much you care about this place and the restoration efforts, which is really special. And off camera, we talked about that it was a life goal of yours in the National Park Service to move up and have impact on places like this. You've been at a number of parks in your career, but what makes this one stand out to you? Why is it so special to you?
I think what's special about it is this idea of hope that it brings, right? That it shows that no matter how downtrodden and how unhealthy and how sick like the forest could be, or society can be, or the people, that if you just, come with an open heart and come with open minds and be open to it, you can create the collaborations and you can build and work together to really restore this earth, which is what we're about in the Park Service. And so I think that's the most special part of this that I didn't know when I came here would be that, right? You think, oh, tallest trees in the world, that's so cool. To me, it's not about the tallest tree in the world. It's about the people here and making those connections and making sure that the National Park Service is part of the solution. We're part of the collaboration with all the people that are here, tribal and non-tribal, to help rebuild this economy, but also rebuild this ecosystem at the same time.
How much do you think all the context that you just shared, how much does that context add to a visitor's experience when they come here beyond just them coming here and saying, oh, it's a really tall tree, it's awesome? How much does context matter, especially in a place like this?
I think this restoration story, we get millions and millions of hits on our social media when we talk about these type of topics. It's really interesting. Where we're sitting right now will one day be a short trail with waysides and interpretive, kind of a self-guided tour of this research site, so we can explain some of the forest restoration work we're doing. We're building here what we call a restoration economy. All this economic activity, we're bringing all this money and resources in collaboration to this landscape, which is highly degraded because it's, boom and bust forest cycle where they cut down the trees and then kind of like the Lorax, literally like they all snuck away and they left a big landscape. That's kind of what this place was like, right? And then fast forward the Lorax 50 years later, it's like a big sickly forest and it's really economically depressed. So we're bringing what we call the restoration economy back here. We're got good high paying jobs for both tribal people and non-tribal people. We really try to focus on hiring local folks here to give them jobs and keep them in the landscape, keep them tied to this landscape, that they want to be here, they want to work here, they want to stay here, but they also want a good paying job. And so we try to bring back that feeling of pride in this area that they already have, but now they can actually live here and help be part of the solution to restore it, and not just be grumpy that the Park Service came and they shut down forestry, right? No, now the Park Service is part of the solution of bringing the economy back, not just tourism, but also all the restoration jobs that come with that. And I do think there's also restoration economy and there's going to be restoration tourism, because it's just such a fascinating story.
Is there a way for visitors to get involved in the restoration story when they come here?
I think there is. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get involved, of course, in terms of, supporting parks and volunteering for parks. And we're no different than any other park with all its visitor use topics that we have to deal with and challenges. And so I would encourage anyone who comes and visits and wants to get involved, to learn more about the restoration and see where they could plug in. Where does their expertise plug in? We have folks all across the gambit of both scientists and heavy equipment operators and administrative people that are involved in this restoration work. So if you want to come here and be part of that, we encourage you to, if you have a passion for this restoration and this story captures you, we need more help. And so the more help we can get, the more work we can do.
There's nearly 40 miles of protected coastline. Mm-hmm. Is there any restoration efforts on the coastline, or is that an area of health for the park? Yeah,
that's an area generally of health, that hasn't been disturbed. And there's 40 miles of undeveloped coastline along the California coast, which is truly spectacular, a real bonus of this park. And we don't have a lot of restoration work targeted towards the shoreline right now.
Last question really on the restoration side of it. Does climate change play a role in going against some of the restoration efforts? Is there a concern of fog maybe not being as prevalent in this area and kind of disrupting the redwoods? How is climate change, maybe hindering what you're trying to do here?
Yeah, so right now, it's uncertain, right? The science is uncertain, but right now, so far, the models look like that because of the really chilly ocean here, right? I grew up in the Atlantic Ocean, which is warm, and you can actually go into it. And this is a very cold ocean. It's very pretty, but very cold. And so that large sink of cold water kind of, I think, stabilizes the climate quite a bit, at least here in the near shore. And so for climate change right now, the models are saying we're not going to have a large impact right here on the shore. Now, will that change over time, and will fog decrease? That is, some studies are saying that, but I don't think it's conclusive enough for me to actually say that. I think what's more concerning is as we move up into the mountain part of the park and you get away from the shoreline, that's where we're seeing more wildfires. Like I mentioned earlier to you, we had our largest wildfire in the history of the park just 2 years ago, right? So we're going to start to see larger, it wasn't a catastrophic fire, right? And we're trying to get in front of that and do thinning, and so we don't have high severity fire within the park, and we have, good burns within the park. Fire is part of the landscape. It's part of the tools that we want to use. We're not trying to exclude fire, but we also don't want the entire park to burn down, right? And so that's really my biggest concern right now, is just trying to build in the resiliency of the forest through the thinning efforts, through this restoration work, and being strategic about where we're doing that work to protect us against catastrophic wildfire. That's probably the biggest climate impact, I would think, at this point that we're concerned about.
Well, I'm sure I could talk to you forever, but as we wrap up this podcast, is there any final thoughts you have regarding the restoration effort, or maybe just encouragement and thoughts of trying to get people to come and see this beautiful place?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd be remiss if I don't say go to redwoodrising.org, right? That's what my friend Griff Griffin, if you haven't seen him, if you follow him, he's awesome. If you go there, you can follow some of his podcasts as well, and some of his short videos. They're just wonderful about the restoration and learn more. So go ahead and go to redwoodrising.org and check that out. If you do come to visit, try to learn more about the local indigenous people. Try to learn more about our restoration efforts. Of course, enjoy the old growth forest. Slow down, take a few more minutes, get away from the highway a little bit. Just walk 20 feet away from the road and you won't hear any more noise. And just stop and give yourself a moment to pause. I know everyone wants to check all the boxes. I do it too, that I go to a park and I want to hit all these different places. I'm so excited. But just get out of your car. Just get a little bit just go a little bit up a trail and just pause and let the forest sink into your heart and into your ears and into your senses, and smell and breathe and just go, okay, redwood forest, okay, I get it.
I love that. I know you're a very busy person with a lot of great and ambitious goals for this forest, which is amazing. But do you get to find time out here to yourself? I
do, and I have 2 boys, and so we do a lot of. I'm very engaged with the Boy Scouts, and we do a lot of hiking in the park and a lot of camping in the park. So I'm very much. I actually think staff. Quite irritated with the hiking superintendent, because I'm often taking pictures, and when I get out, I send them pictures and go, this trail needs work here, and this campsite is a little run down. So yes, I'm a big user of the park, and I get to bring all these other folks into the park as well through the Scouts, and it's just a wonderful experience to really be out in the resource that you're helping to steward.
I love that. You deserve it. And this is a great and amazing place to live and recreate. So count me as jealous in that regard.
Thank you. Welcome back anytime. So.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. This has been a blast.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for checking out this edition of the Safe Travels podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast getting to meet and chat with Steve. His passion for these parks is incredible, and the story that's unfolding here with all the restoration efforts that are happening at Redwood National and State Parks is amazing. So if you like this type of content, it would mean a lot to me if you liked, commented, and subscribed. And until next time, safe travels.